Hey, Alan here, and talk with you a little bit today about cold weather RVing. This is something that I guess is near and dear to my heart. I'm a ski instructor all winter. I've been in conditions down to minus 20 to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Forgive my voice. I still have my winter hoarseness. It kind of came back, and actually, it's appropriate. It's the 25th of April as I'm recording this, and it's snowing outside, and it's the middle of the day. If I don't sound thrilled, it's because I'm not thrilled. Anyway, let's start with those of you who are going to be in what I call slight cold. Now, let's understand there's really very little real estate in this country, in the United States of America, that is not exposed to sub-freezing weather at some point during the winter at night. There's the frost line in Florida, and typically that's somewhere in the Jupiter to Palm Beach area. If you're significantly north of Jupiter or Palm Beach, Florida, you're going to experience sub-freezing weather, and almost all of Texas is suspect or subject to sub-freezing weather. So this is for you. On those nights when the temperature is going to drop below freezing, but not far below freezing, we're talking, let's say, no lower than 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. There are a few things that you need to do to protect yourself from added cost and added inconvenience. The number one thing that you can do is you can disconnect your water hose. And forgive me as I look over, I'm checking my notes on my computer. If you have a heated underbelly, run your propane to keep your plumbing from the off chance that it freezes. But it would be a good idea to do something to make sure that you keep the plumbing area, especially if it's going to get down into the teens and it's going to do it for several hours, from having a freezing problem. If not, you could use heat lamps or a ceramic heater. The caution I have for you there is that could be a fire hazard. You've got to be very careful when you're putting a ceramic heater underneath your rig. Um, so if you use space heaters, realize that'll help with the interior, but it isn't going to do much on the exterior. And also know your rig's limits with heaters. If you have a 50 amp, it might be one on each circuit, and if you have a 30 amp, it might be one, other than connecting directly to the pedestal. Most RV parks have a pedestal with a 20 amp plug-in, your regular wall plug-in, and you can, of course, connect a outside heater to that. Um, in lieu of heating the underbelly, you might consider turning the water on and just letting it drip for the night. You might think about just letting a slow drip, but then make sure that your tanks don't overflow. Keep the gray water tanks open. That's always safe. So that's not a problem, but leave your black tank closed. Um, and my last thought for those of you who are in really southern locations where this is kind of an occasional thing. First of all, beware of icy steps on that first step out in the morning. If you have frost, it could make those steps very icy. I've had a couple of mornings where my first step was almost my last step, and enjoyed the chilly mornings. Having lived in South Florida, I relished the mornings where it got chilly out. So that really addresses folks who are in cold weather for very brief periods. Now let's move to what I call serious cold. So when I say serious cold, I'm talking about serious cold. Let's start with for brief periods. This is for a month or so or less. One of the first things you're going to want to do, if at all possible, is skirt your rig. And that means you're going to want to get canvas skirting that can fold up nicely, that you can travel with. And there are two ways to do that. You can go to a tent and awning shop. There are some in every town or in many towns, or you can buy it online. If you buy it online, the connection system is not going to necessarily be as elegant as a tent and awning shop will do, but it'll be a fraction of the price. So that's something to consider. And I would definitely recommend having skirting because you want to keep that underbelly from freezing. That's really a big deal, especially if you're going to be in a place where the temperature is going to be below freezing for much of the night and maybe even much of the day. That's pretty significant. You also, of course, need to do all of the stuff that I mentioned earlier for those who are in very brief periods of cold weather. But I'd also recommend getting a heated hose. And I have one in particular I recommend, and there should be a link below where if you're on my post. If not, if somehow you found this on YouTube, click the upper right-hand button in the corner, the tab in the corner, bring you over to my post. You'll see the hose that I recommend, and you can get right onto Amazon and get that. I would further recommend that you not leave your tanks open. All right, I'd recommend that you close your tanks, and the reason for that is, unless you've got a very good flow from the from your sewer cap to the sewer drop at a campground, you want to make sure you're going to end up with water collecting, fluids collecting in there. It's going to freeze. So my best advice is leave the tanks closed, just open them up when you need, and be sensitive to the fact that your tank poles, your T-poles, might be frozen if you try and do this when it's 15 below zero outside. So, you know, do it at a time when the sun's out, and park your RV in a way that that side of the RV, ideally also the side with the refrigerator, is in the sunlight so that it gets the most amount of heating, the most amount of daylight to help that work smoothly for you. Another thing you can do is consider insulation between your windows and your window shades. I use bubble wrap. Again, I picked it up on Amazon. I'll have a link for you to show you what I bought. But simply enough, bubble wrap will provide that extra layer of insulation between the window and the window shade, or between the outside world and the inside world, and it won't block the light. So that I like a lot better than people that turn their RV into a cave. I've seen that done. You probably have too. Be sure your fridge has a winter kit on it, and put in some kind of heating lamp, a heated light bulb, an incandescent lamp, the old style, if possible, outside the fridge. There's a compartment that very often has room for a bulb. Make sure you don't burn up any wiring. Make sure you don't burn up any part of the fridge. But that bulb is going to help with keeping your fridge operating. And again, as I mentioned, try to park so that your fridge is on the southern side of your RV. Now, with respect to the RV, there are other steps you can consider, but here's a caveat. They will significantly increase the risk of a fire hazard if you don't do it right. So I'm not going to recommend that you do this, but you could cover the outside vents on the refrigerator, or at least partially cover them, so that that keeps heat built up inside. Still, not a good idea, and it's a high risk. You do it at your own risk. Continuing on, if you have a three-season unit, one that isn't really insulated very well, one that isn't really sealed in the underbelly very well, or may not even have forced air heating through the underbelly, then what I would do is consider a heat source of some type under the rig. And I mentioned that earlier, but that's something that, again, fire hazard. If you're considering something like a ceramic heater, definitely a risk for a fire hazard if you do that. So you've got to be smart about what you're doing, but you really do need to do something. Otherwise, you're going to end up with frozen pipes, and you definitely don't want that. Now, if it snows, that's a mixed blessing. Snow is a great insulator, but you don't want too much snow on the roof. You don't want too much snow on the slides. My general rule of thumb, about 1 foot to 18 inches on the roof is okay, depending on how wet the snow is, and no more than 8 inches on the slides. I would recommend getting a roof rake, and again, I've got a link on my post that will suggest to you the roof rake that I'm using. It's got reach to get almost every part of the roof, so you don't have to become Tarzan and climb up on the roof every other day if you're in a snowy area. Definitely a nice thing to have. When you do use the roof rake, be careful how you use it so you don't end up cutting your roof up. All right, there is the possibility, if you are not careful, that could occur, and that could become an expensive problem if you don't address it fairly quickly. You need to keep your propane running while the temperatures are below freezing, and keep an eye on the tanks in severe cold. You could actually burn through a 30-pound to 7-gallon tank in as little as 2 to 3 days. For myself, I'm stationary all winter. I contact a local propane company, and I rent a 120-gallon tank, which is, of course, many multiples of the 7-gallon bottles that we have as RVers, or worse yet, 5-gallon bottles if you have a smaller travel trailer. I would recommend getting insulated vent covers for the inside vents. So if you have roof vents in a fifth wheel or a travel trailer, find a way to insulate those, and Camco makes a nice little product. Again, I'll have a link for you so you can locate the right product for that. And keep your batteries charged. Dead batteries are far more susceptible to freezing and getting damaged than having your batteries charged. Now, presumably, if you're spending a lot of time in the winter, in cold weather, you're going to be connected to shore power. In other words, you'll be connected to a pedestal at an RV park. In other words, you're connected to 110. And if that's the case, that should charge the batteries and it should not be an issue. Our next section is what I do, serious cold extended stay, coming up. Now, for serious cold extended stay, one of the things I'm going to recommend is you should keep your gray tanks open. You're living in the thing, you're spending a lot of time there. So how do you keep the sewer hose from freezing up? Simple. Get yourself some heat tape and wrap it around the sewer hose. Again, recommended product linked on the page. Be careful not to overload your pedestal. Your pedestal is good for 20 amps. Inevitably or likely, the RV park you're at is going to have some kind of heating element on their hydrant. That's what's serving the water to you. So you don't want to put yourself in a position where you trip the GFI circuit. So make sure that you are being gentle with the amount of things that you plug into that 20 amp circuit on the pedestal at your RV park. Of course, you're going to want to do everything that I named earlier. You might want to confer with others in the park regarding refrigerator prep. There's always somebody out there that may have some great knowledge, and you might want to turn to them for that. Make sure you have a rig with thermopane windows. It's a big deal. It'd be very nice to have thermopane windows. So if you don't have that, you might want to consider, if you're going to spend a lot of time in cold weather, trade it in and get yourself one with thermopane windows. Add tank heaters if they're accessible. Now, that's not necessarily vital. I don't have them, but I do skirt and I do run a lot of propane so that I keep that underbelly from freezing up. So the tank heaters might be considered extra protection. You could easily add more ARC-14 foil in the underbelly if you can access the underbelly and if you feel it necessary. I mentioned earlier renting a 120-gallon propane tank. You'll also pay less for propane that way. When you buy it by the 50 to 100 gallons, you're going to pay a lot less than when you go to the RV park or the local Ace Hardware and say, give me 5 or 7 gallons. So you will get a quantity discount. And I keep my thermostat inside in the low to mid 60s. That, for me, is enough to keep the underbelly from freezing. You'll have to explore yourself, but err on the side of too warm, not too cold. I even keep a window open all winter just to, let some extra heat out because I don't need that heat. I do need the heat for the underbelly. I'd recommend keeping cabinets open, closets open, your bedroom clothes closet, your wardrobe closet, and you might even need a space heater to go in there periodically. Why? Because depending on how your rig is insulated, you might end up with frost building up in those cabinets or in your wardrobe closet. And you're not going to like it if mold or mildew begins to develop on your clothing because you've got moisture in there all winter. So keep them open and occasionally put a space heater, and keep an eye on space heaters. They can be a fire hazard. I would almost never run the RV with not being there and having a space heater on. But particularly if you have pets or young kids, you've got to be aware that if that gets knocked over, that could be an issue. Make sure you get one that'll simply trip itself when it falls over, so it won't continue to keep running. Again, I mentioned keeping the windows open a crack. That'll keep moisture from accumulating. It's typically very dry in the winter in most mountain areas, at least. That may not work so well if you're in coastal Maine, and it'll keep your air flowing. And remember, your fireplace is a very nice, very expensive heater, but it will do nothing for the underbelly. It will not heat the underbelly. And again, as I mentioned earlier, on those very cold nights when it gets to minus 10 or lower, I will typically run my water on a trickle all night. But again, make sure that your tanks are open, your gray tanks, so that you're not filling the tank and end up with a flood in the morning. Well, with those thoughts, that's winter camping. That's preparation for winter camping. I'm Alan. This is RVAcrossAmerica.net. Feel free to go there and visit all kinds of posts about all kinds of things. But I wanted to give you a good prep on what you may want to consider. And again, if you're finding this on YouTube, you'll find my post and I'll have links for all these things I'm recommending. Thank you, and you have a wonderful day.